Yep. Hello, everyone. Today is June 14th, 2021. This is a CNCF certified meeting of the SIG Network API subgroup to SIG Network. So please be nice to everybody and let's have a productive meeting today. So going ahead and getting started on the agenda, I checked out the issues, didn't see any new issues today, which involving network policy, which is always good. If people are ever interested in how I do that, there's a link up at the top of the sheet titled issue triage link, and that's where I essentially look for new issues. But that shows you all the issues with, I'll share my screen. That shows you all the issues with the network policy, area network policy tag, but not all of the issues that haven't been triaged into that. So I'll show you what I'm talking about here. As you can see, these are all area network policy, but a lot of times they won't get the correct label. So you'll need to query all the issues and just kind of look through and see if there's any pertaining to network policy, which is what I do every week. The most recent one was 17 days ago, and we've already kind of been over it. We're just waiting for a response from the reporter. Cool. So I also wanted to give a quick shout out to Tom. Tom, if you want to give a quick intro, he's another engineer from Red Hat who's going to hopefully be stepping in and helping out here. So
hello.
Just wanted to give him a quick shout out and get some stuff done. Cool. And if I ever forget any week, if there's new people and I don't notice it, tell me to stop at the beginning, and we can give them a shout out and introduce them to the group. So moving right on through, I know last time there was some discussion about the API groups change that was started on the Gateway API repo. There was a little more follow up on that in another issue made by Antonio that I wanted to bring up today regarding a possible like API groups registry within SIG Network to, help us internally handle all these new APIs that are popping up for the various subgroups within SIG Network. Otherwise, I don't really have much to say about it. I don't know if you've heard anything else, Ricardo, that I should highlight here, but I thought I would go ahead and post the links here so people can comment if they feel a certain way.
What about? Sorry, Andrew.
The discussion around moving from xk8s.io group to k8s.io kind of blossomed into another discussion like it usually does, into creating an API groups registry within SIG Network, or maybe not even within SIG Network, but for all of Kubernetes. Have you seen this yet?
No, I didn't.
Cool. There's always something new. This was from Antonio, and Tim is a big fan of it.
I did.
Sorry, Abhishek, go ahead.
Okay. No, I was going to say I did take a look at this issue and Tim's comment, and I think it makes sense because as there are more subgroups or more people using the k8s.io or any other reserved API group and wants to create subgroups out of it, I think management of these API names across those subgroups becomes a challenge. So having a sort of a convention around that and some sort of a group or registry for this makes sense. I was a bit confused on if you scroll a little further down under the topic of subscoping. Yeah, you see there is the second point. I think Tim is basically trying to provide some sort of convention for such names. And I think one of the things that he mentioned that do not embed the resource name as part of the group. So we are looking at creating a subgroup under the networking KHIO for our CRDs, anything network policy API. So I was kind of like confused as to whether network policy or something like that resource name.kh.io would make sense or not. And I didn't quite understand whether when he says counterexample, does that mean like he is willing to do some exceptions, or he's just trying to give examples of what should not be the name of the API group? So in our case, we should not have network policy networking.kh.io as the group name.
Yeah, that's a good point, because that's what would make the most sense to me right off the bat. It is a little bit confusing here. Maybe we'll try to give that a comment and see what he means.
Yeah, I think for example, Ingress, they chose not to have the Ingress name in there because they went ahead with gateway or they are at least proposing gateway.networking.kh.io or something on similar lines. So if that's the case, then maybe we would also need to think about some of a generic term under network policy. Sorry, under networking. Yeah, that's the proposal, I think, which is gaining more momentum than other names. But
yeah.
So basically, we should also look at something on similar lines for our sub-project.
Yeah, and it's something that we'll probably need to fall out as we get further along with the CMP stuff, obviously, because that'll be following whatever we do.
Right. Yes, agreed.
Cool. Great. So yeah, just wanted to highlight that. Obviously, go comment away on any confusions.
Just on the names, there isn't routing a sort of very overloaded name. I mean, I'm an L3 guy, so for me, routing is very much packets. But I mean, you route messages, we route pretty much everything, anything. Where something needs to decide where something goes, like there can be message bus with routing, packets with routing, anything. So what I assume this is API, right? And gateways, we're talking routing of.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's one of the reasons why the routing is not gaining any votes for that particular.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, Per, go say that on the issue. I think that's another really good point. I totally agree with you. It's overloaded. So that would be awesome. Cool.
I will go and. Yeah.
Great. So yeah, I just wanted to bring that up and document it in the agenda. The next thing on the list was something I put as a to-do from last week, which was to bring in legacy docs. I opened a PR that basically brings all of Jay's old tracking repository into Network Policy API. There might be some more stuff we need to add here. So I know, Avishek, you have an issue open for something similar. So feel free to comment and tell me that we need to add more stuff here. I'd like to just get it all done in a single PR. So open to comments on that. And obviously Jay isn't here, but I'd love to hear what he has to think about it. Cool. That was just something small. So on to the main meat of the what we're doing today. The user stories are still up on the repo now for both V2 APIs, thanks to Prasad and Nadeem, and also cluster scope policy. So I don't know if we wanted to highlight kind of where we are with cluster scope policy, Yang or Abhishek really quickly, or run through anything with the group as a whole, and then we can shift over to Prasad and Nadeem to give a quick note on the new stories they just added. Does that sound good?
Yeah, sounds good. Yang, do you want to talk about the user story?
I don't think I have much update on the user stories other than I think Abhishek highlighted on one of the user stories, which is the zero trust cluster. I think you did make a comment on how this can serve as a justification for the default network policy. Maybe do you want to talk a little bit on that front?
Yeah. So I think one of the key things that was missing in the KEP was that there was no use case which was justifying a new CRD or anything which would involve a default network policy CRD. So I was looking to add something, and then I was going through the original use cases Yang has uploaded, and one of that story, the zero trust story, which is this, kind of resonates in terms of like it sounds like we are talking about something like a default posture for your clusters, and then it also adds on top of like some certain allow rules should be part of this cluster, because you want that critical traffic to flow through your cluster. For example, all your pods should be able to talk to core DNS, and that's something that should be a strict policy rather than a weak policy. But on the other hand, you may want to start with a cluster which does not allow any intra namespace, or sorry, any traffic to flow through, and you need your namespace owners to explicitly open up traffic. So that is something that justifies the default network policy use case. So I think I wanted to highlight that this is the user story that I just put the TLDR at the top, that the use case here can be solved by a default network policy, which default denies the clusters, and then a couple of cluster network policy rules, which allows the critical traffic. And then individual namespace owners can write their own network policies to allow their services to communicate with each other. So I think this story gives like a good use case. This is like a good use case for how clusters can be structured.
Yeah, and I think that was one bit of feedback from the original KEP, was we don't, maybe there isn't a good enough justification for DNP, but I tend to agree with you here. I'm going to read through it again this week and add some comments there. Are there any other thoughts on the zero trust cluster user story from anyone else, if the people have had time to read through these?
So Abhishek, I have a couple of quick questions. I didn't go through this, but so is this a DNP is part of the post evaluation of the network policy, or how does it work?
So DNP is actually a separate CRD that we plan to add. So if you think about how network policies are enforced, after your clusters are initialized, you would probably create network policies to open up some traffic or secure some of your workloads. So similarly, it is also something that will come out after the cluster is initialized, because you can have additional tooling on top of it, wherein whenever your clusters are created, you have a DNP which performs this default deny for your clusters. And that way, as soon as your clusters are initialized, you have a default deny posture. But in general, this behaves in similar ways as the Kubernetes network policy, that in the administrator must explicitly create this DNP resource, which would then be enforced by the network plugin vendors to actually realize those deny rules. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, just to put it in my words. So first, the order of evaluation is first CNP, then KNP, then the DNP. Is that right?
Yes, you're correct.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah, and I assume once we get to the point of conclusion on discussion on these user stories, like in the KEP, Abhishek did a good job of laying out the precedents there, and it's a little clearer. Like we're kind of looking at it a little backwards with this one by saying we're building this to justify default network policy, but default cluster network policy.
But that's not the the proposal has 2 CRDs, but that's not the only way to solve this problem. We can have a hybrid approach, and we have laid out alternative proposals in the KEP. So whatever is best for users, which is more intuitive, I think we would go with that. But currently, the proposal calls out for 2 separate CRDs because it's separating the intent. One is for stricter rules, the other is for weaker rules.
Yep, I agree. And I wasn't able to make it on Thursday to the SIG network meeting, but were you two able to go ahead and present those 3 user stories you really were ready to get review on there?
Yeah, I think we did mention on those 3 user stories are ready for review. So, but we didn't get a time to basically present it on the SIG network per se. Okay. But Tim has a very regular comment on if we want these stories to be reviewed and seen by the SIG network guys, we just needed to make some noises on the Slack channel. Mm-hmm. And maybe even ping people to let them know, okay, this is ready for review. Please, take a look at it and stuff. Which is what we're gonna do in this week, I think. Great. Yeah, this is one thing, and I also wanted to bring up 2 small points. One is that in last Thursday SIG network meeting, I think Tim was originally preparing a topic to go over, which is how the IP block problem in the current network policy, which is closely related to our cluster network policy proposal. Right. But unfortunately, I think he didn't get time to go through this topic in the last meeting. So he did postpone this as a agenda item for the next SIG network meeting, which is going to happen next Thursday. Okay. We'll still closely monitor this and see how it goes, and we'll update the discussion with this group. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that in addition to the user stories that we are still refining and gathering feedback on this repo, Abhishek and I did make some updates on addressing the comments from the original cluster network policy cap, as well as did a little bit of modification to the original API. So one big change is I think when a lot of people reviewed the original PR, they think some people think the 3 actions are a little bit awkward. The action that's a little bit awkward is the authorized action, which a lot of people think didn't make sense. And Tim also commented on this, where he thinks that authorized action has a big problem, where if you authorize something like authorize traffic from your same namespace and then deny everything else, we are essentially saying that the namespace cannot be segmented anymore because the authorized is such a strong allow. And if you use it to just do the namespace isolation, then it just doesn't reflect our initial intent in this regard. So taking his advice, I've basically redo the authorized to a new action called empower. So now we have 3 actions still, but it's empower, deny, and allow. And following up on Tim's suggestion, that what the empower essentially does is that if a rule is empowered, it basically skips the deny rule evaluation. So I'm not explicitly saying that this should be allowed, but it's basically providing an exception to the deny rules. Now, with those 3 actions, I think we can still express all the intents that we have in all the user stories that we put up, but it's a little bit more clear and it's a little bit more flexible. So this is what this is something that we've done to do some further enhancements to the CAP. if you guys wanted to also take a look and see if that makes sense to you, it will be awesome.
Great. Yeah, good work. I'll try to give that a look this week. And yeah, I mean, if Tim is saying something, it's probably pretty relevant. And if he thinks a certain thing, it's going to go pretty far. So if it makes sense to him, it's probably a good idea.
The new Empower really makes sense because we don't want to allow something. We rather would want namespace owners to make those decisions. So that definitely makes a lot of sense. And I think that's something that we missed out in the beginning. So I respect him generally. If he says same thing, that it's mostly very valid point.
So yeah, now, I mean, it kind of aligns, right? So the only place we had exceptions for people who hadn't thought about this before, I guess, is with IP blocks, right? So IP blocks were a way to say allow traffic from certain external networks or to external networks with exceptions. So you could have a small subset of the network allowed and some not. And so now you're kind of bringing that powerful exception model to actions, which we didn't have before. So I think it makes sense with the current API in that regard. So cool. Good job.
Yeah, it'd be great if folks on this call can do one round of review of this offline and provide comments, because I think that will really help us get this API correct. There might be some blind sides that we are ignoring, and the group here can help us bring that out in the open.
So would default network policy or default cluster network policy have the same actions then?
So the current proposal is for default network policy to be more aligned with Kubernetes network policy, in a way that it's whitelist rules only, which has a default isolation. So their behavior is very close to what Kubernetes network policy is. So there is no explicit action as part of it.
Is there overlap with, I haven't read through it, but is there overlap with the, feature set of default cluster network policy and the empower action of cluster scope policy?
Not that we could think of, because if you don't want to allow if you don't want to deny certain things, and you leave the rule as is, or you leave those pods as is, so they will be allowed. So there's nothing below the default network policy. So empower would essentially means like it's a waterfall model where after these rules you actually fall back to the lower level rules. But since there's nothing below the default network policy, at least I can't think of a reason why we would need an empower action there, but I could be wrong. So maybe we can think through some use case which requires some of that. Then we can think of altering the CRD for DNP.
Totally makes sense. The only reason I keep harping on it too is I don't know what Ricardo thinks or what other people think, but I think selling the default network policy is going to be one of the harder parts, because people just they've never heard of it in SIG network, right? It's a whole new idea, and I'm not saying it's a bad idea at all, but everyone kind of wants a cluster network policy, but then you're like, well, we need this other object too along with it. It's going to constantly be like, why do we need this? I saw that all over the KEP.
Yeah, true. I agree. Some folks agree that we need weaker rules, while some folks believe that we don't really need them. So it's going to be interesting to see how people who changes their mind.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe it's something at the end of the day better left to V2 set of APIs. Maybe we don't want to necessarily encompass that feature until then, but I guess time will tell. But thanks for all the great work. Are there any other questions for Abhishek and Yang?
No.
Not at this moment.
Great. Awesome. Thank you all. So let's keep some reviews there. And then I know you got Prasad and Nadeem posted a bunch of V2 user stories. So I would like to go over those as a group. Maybe not today. Let me pull them up.
Yeah. So when we do user stories, do we have somewhere listed sort of what the valid actors are for different versions? I mean, for clusters, obviously, when we saw now, it's the operator, right? And for the old ones, I assume it's the person that is running the service. But I mean, when we go to V2, could we start sort of just looking at who are the actors and what are the different cases from that perspective we want to cover?
You mean main personas, so main
Yeah,
users?
so exactly. So if you look at, well, I used to work at Ericsson, don't work there, but someone that writes applications that they don't run. They write applications or service stuff like that they sell, that then gets that is then run by let's say a telco, and you're going to have many of them that be run for different tenants on top of a cluster that's operated by someone, right? Can we cover that, and sort of what are the sort of how would an Ericsson be able to write network policies for their application that's then going to run on a Kubernetes cluster somewhere? And you're going to have 10 different instances or 100 different instances of the same application for different of AT&T's customers. How do you write the network policies that make sense? And sort of what is the model we want to see? Should they more write templates that get instantiated every time? That is a sort of a new network policy that's created for each of those instances? Or do we have network policies that are, call it, more instantiated? So if Ericsson would change their network policy, it would change over all of them at the same time. Like, what is the mechanism we want to see for such things?
I mean, I'm open to seeing user stories, right? So each individual user story should start with what the main persona is.
You know, for sure, it's sort of more. Should we also sort of build up some model so that describes which user personas we see and where they fit as part of this? So we can say, so we have standard name. And try to understand what use cases fits for the different roles then, and attack them. So it's something it spins in my head off and on right now. Because looking at a lot of, call it, 5G use cases where you have a lot of secondary networks and you have a lot of 5G enterprise customers running on, let's say, AT&T's clusters. They might spin up like 500 customers right in one customer then, and they all run their enterprise 5G or the same service, just over different networks. So how would you describe policies in a way so it's manageable?
So Per, one of the, I mean, maybe it doesn't address fully. The fifth user story is trying to cover what you're asking.
Which one?
The fifth user story, which is the policy.
I looked at some of them.
Yeah, policy repetitions.
Yeah, so, but I mean, yeah.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, like, you know, I mean, user might have, I mean, one example we took is, let's say I have a Kubernetes network policy, I mean, or any policy, right? We wanted to go through a deployment phase, I mean, development phase, deployment, or maybe pre-production, or it could be repeated across different customers. So we try to introduce a, match class here, with that, at least a part of the user story, what you're talking, would be addressed here.
I'm gonna read this for sure. So for me, like I said, I see sort of three different. One is the organization writing the application, and sort of they might want to set up both network policies and some sort of way to me, break apart the network attachment definitions. So you have one that's logical and sort of maps into what is for the service, and then you have instantiation of the service by an operator or by a tenant, and then you have the cluster itself. Not sure if I have all the model, but I do think that the person that knows best how to write the policies for his application is the organization that created that application, that knows how the dependencies are inside and who should be able to talk to what, right, and so on.
Agreed.
Then when someone's going to take and run that, well, then you need to instantiate it. That's when you feed in probably things like the namespace is going to use, because if you run 100 of them, obviously the namespace is not the same. So that needs to be injected. And also if there is, like we said before, IP blocks, they also need to be injected, because the application writer can never have an idea of the IP blocks, right? So how would that look like without sort of having to risk?
With V2, we aren't limited necessarily to IP blocks for existing.
Yeah. And sort of how would we come up with a mechanism so that we don't risk that people sit and try to copy some template, and then you risk doing you risk copying the wrong way, right? And you introduce errors by human errors. Or if someone comes with an update of a policy because they found something wrong with it, and you want to deploy that policy, how do you make sure that you hit all of those services then and not have to go sort of, you do 99 out of 100, right? Or something like that. How can we build such mechanisms? That's why it's clearly V2. And for me, that's like 2-3 year goal or something like that to have that, something like that sorted out. If it's done by saying that there is a mechanism that works at the meta level that will create the underlying policies, or if the policy sort of mechanisms themselves allow for these sort of injections, I have really no, I don't know which one makes sense, or as long as sort of there is a way to cover all the bases, so to speak, so there's an automated mechanism to take care of it, then how it really, what it looks like in runtime is of less.
Per, you could help us, articulating those user stories. We will. Sorry.
Yeah, and trust me, I'm pushing this. I talk to people at Ericsson every other week, and I'm telling them, like, go in, sort of get involved in all the freaking groups if you have these problems. I mean, we have one CNFs, so I see, and at the same time, we're selling systems to operators that are Kubernetes based. I see both ends of it, but I do think that we're gonna.
Actually, a lot of the problems are the use cases which you raised now, right? So I mean, at least we were thinking that, like, the existing user stories maybe 70-80% would cover, which we put under V2. But anything is missing, like, we can keep enhancing them. So basically, like, based on the application, I would be able to write a full, full-blown, firewall policies, across all these services.
Yeah.
So that's what is, at least, like, one of the intent, like, we wanted to address using the V2. So it's like, kind of application based. Let's say if it is a HR app, which is 3-tier, could be running across, like, so many geographic locations, or so many clusters. I mean, so many.
That was my second for V2. Will V2, will we start to try to address multi-cluster or single cluster?
We should be addressing multi-cluster as I see, but until somebody says no, I mean, then, we can.
Yeah, no, I agree with you that we should.
I think multi-cluster is a good use case, but I think that is kind of an out of scope for, at least I feel that way, that it would be out of scope for any network policy application, because there are a lot of challenges involved when it comes to multi-cluster. And, first of all, I think there are a lot of discussions currently happening on how to do service discovery. The MCS API is one example that kept, but it's still not quite, hashed out. And so there are going to be a lot of implementations. So before we talk about how these service discoveries happen across clusters and how that's standardized, and then now you want to think about how to apply policies which span across multiple clusters. So then there is, how does a developer in.
I'm completely with you. I'm just sort of asking the question, and I think it makes sense to.
No, but I do agree that it is a problem to be solved, but I think it's a separate.
That's V3 then, or extension to V2, right? Yeah.
Correct. I do have a question for the V2 folks who are, writing those user stories. I want to understand. I mean, to be honest, I have not yet gone through every single use case, so my bad. But if you can give a high level idea of who's the persona that you're trying to solve this use case for, because are you referring to multiple personas? For example, the cluster administrator is different versus a namespace administrator versus a developer, or are we talking about cluster administrator versus a developer persona? And the V2 is aimed towards the developer persona. Because I did read cluster admin, as I think Andrew is highlighting. I did read V2 referencing cluster admin, so I was not quite sure what we are or whom are we targeting this. So
yes, so Nadeem, you can also pitch in. Basically, we were trying to go after two personas. One is the cluster admin. Cluster admin be able to define the application-based policies or the policy constructs which are intent-based. So that applies to the whole cluster. So that is one persona, and the second is like the namespace admin can have his own network policies. So the way it is first cluster network policies would be higher precedence. Then the later one is the network admins network policies are the next precedence. So that's how we are layering things. So actually we have gone through one one video of how how our contrail policies or the Juniper our implementation, some of the building blocks we lifted from there. So maybe going through that would give you some more clarity. Or if not, like, we can go over it again. That's not a problem at all. So
maybe I missed, sorry.
Yeah.
So just to give context to Abhishek, right, in terms of personas, right? So the cluster admin is something which you definitely are aware of, because we took this term from the CNP stories. And so this is the scope of this persona is exactly what you and Yang are trying to do in the CNP. Because the use cases are a little different and implementation is a little different, solving some of the V1 limitations. The other one, which we are calling namespace admin, namespace admin term may be a misnomer, but yeah, what we are trying to use that for is the persona who can create policies within a namespace, like the current Kubernetes network policy. Not the CNP, but the existing Kubernetes network policy. So that is what we are calling is the namespace admin. I see sometimes in this forum we refer to that as a developer. So if we have a well-defined common name which we use for that persona, we can change that. But it's basically one persona who can create network policy and one persona who can create cluster network policy.
And I'd be open to, I think it'd be a great idea to maybe a doc alongside the docs you already have, going over and describing personas. I mean, in the docs / user stories repo. I don't think that'd be a horrible idea. Like, I mean, our personas can generally be the same for all these, or like our categories of personas can be the same for all these user stories. It might help in that confusion point.
Exactly. Sort of.
Should we put under V2 README or something? How do you propose, Andrew?
I'm up for anything, whatever the community wants. I don't think it needs to be just under V2. I think for all of these user stories, we can have
I see.
A single like described list of personas and what they mean, like maybe an in-depth about what they mean.
Makes sense.
I don't know what other people think about that. It might just make it easier if there are questions in the future.
Yeah, that sounds good. And I was under the impression, I was hoping that the namespace admin is the developer persona. And we are not talking about two separate roles there within namespace. So we are on board, we are on the same page at least with that. For the V2 cluster admin related user stories, I would hope that you can help us write those as part of the cluster network policy user stories and not V2, because V2 for a cluster admin does not make sense, because today we do not have any V1 for cluster network policy. So if there is something that is not being addressed by the cluster network policy resource for the cluster admin user stories, then please bring that up to the KEP or in our user stories for cluster network policy, so that we also make sure that those use cases are satisfied. And for anything developer or namespace admin related use cases, I think V2 makes more sense. So that's the only feedback, and I'll go through the individual use cases, and I agree with Andrew's point about adding these personas document to the user story section.
Okay, so Abhishek, one more point is if you look into the intent-based rules, which is the first user story, I believe. So that gives you little clarity why we are trying to add CNP v2 CNP v2 kind of a thing, rather than just adding it to the CNP directly itself. So one of the thing we are after is like instead of user specifying ingress and egress, so we are trying to collapse that so that user give this specify the intent. There is no ingress and egress here. Like user specifies that, like let's say user wants to communicate between web tier to app tier, and he just says that like web to app communicate, rather than select at the pod selector at the web and say egress to app, and reverse like where go to the app selector and say ingress from web. So we are trying to avoid that, which is in the first user story. And the same thing we are replicating to the network policy or the network admins namespace based network policy.
Yeah, I think there's room there, Abhishek. Like there's some user stories that just may not be able to be fully covered by the current CMP scope because it would involve a major break from the existing API. So that means maybe new selectors, totally new actions, like rule priorities. I think those are all things that would push CNP as is into this like now CNP is its all new set of APIs.
I see. I took a quick look at that user story, and now I see what you're trying to do, and I think that's a use case for not just CNP but NP network policies, and it's like a totally radical new way of defining policy. So I see why you have a separate use case there.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you missed a couple of them in the previous sessions. So when we talked to Andrew and others, they proposed, why not put that as a V2? So hence, we started in that direction. But, we are still, we are still open, please let us know how, and also we will add, we'll look into the PERS comments, like, any user stories we keep need to enhance for V2.
Yep.
Yeah,
and
so
they just posted them on Friday, so I mean it's
So in my experience with SIG Network, typically the kind of reaction that you will get for this radical approach is that today you can achieve the same using two network policies. There is one for ingress rules and one for egress rules. So if you are able to solve those use cases by doing this, then you don't need a new API. And these are not my words. I'm just telling you what you may hear. And this is something that Ricardo, I think he's offline now, but this is something that Ricardo heard a lot about when he was trying to do the port ranges kept. So just something that you may hear in the future.
Got it. Yeah, good input. So actually, see, basically there are two combination things are happening in this V2 proposals. One is, from and to, or like, endpoint 1 and endpoint 2. And, the second utility we are trying to use is the match class. So combination of this, we think, we can reduce a lot of, network policy explosion. So that was the main reason, going through this little radical approach, Abhishek. So maybe, we can create some kind of a higher level document to, highlight why we are taking the radical step here.
Yeah, and it would be good to also document something like why this is not possible with the current V1 API, or why is it problematic with current V1 API. I think that will definitely resonate a lot with SIG network folks, because then you don't have to explain. I think basically you need to clearly define the shortcomings of the V1 API and then build on top of it. So I think that will be very helpful for the community.
Question.
Sure. Actually, we talked to Per and Andrew separately on this. So maybe I didn't realize we should create a doc to give some why we are taking this radical step.
I mean, as part of your existing use cases, I think maybe a section regarding
that's sort of why to describe the use cases and sort of the models first as a explanation, right? I mean, I go on that trap all the time. I present something how it should work, and that what everyone wants to know is like why.
Got it.
Yeah, I'm fully up for adding
so
some
maybe,
documentation around that.
So maybe should we add it into the notes section, or where should we add? What's the right way to do?
Part of me sort of believes sort of that overall it's not just policy, right, but the networking. What networking model do we want to have in Kubernetes when we move forward? I mean, there's talk about multi-networks, network policies. What is the overall model? Sort of how should it work? I mean, example here, right? The network policy is using L3 constructs, but is really sort of built as a contractor on layer 2, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to run the policies right just on a local link when there's no routing. Things like that. Do we want the network policies to work for multi-networking? In that case, how does it work? I see no problem with it. It's an implementation problem in the CNIs and so on, how to keep track of all these addresses, but to describe the dependence in between different objects shouldn't have sort of, there's no IP addresses in there, and so who cares how many networks and how many addresses are involved, right? But to get to the basis for that, what is the overall ambition? And then it's much simpler to describe the technology and sort of the pieces needed to reach that ambition. What I'm scared of, otherwise, is that we might build something super duper policies that handles multi-networking, and then from the networking side it says no, there's no multi-networking, there's single network, and so on and so on. So I don't know if that, so that's the SIG networking meetings is really bad time for me. I can't really go to them, but I'm working on moving my schedules around. But I think that is the first thing to do if we have a little more time to understand what are we trying to do, what sort of applications and use cases do we want our networking to be able to support, and how do we do that? And then policy.
So are you asking about the NAD network attached definition, or the default network?
I mean, I come from a world, I mean, you were in it too, right, where everything is multi-homed, and I completely understand why Kubernetes is trying to keep, and at the same time, anything that can be single home should be single home, right? But if you're doing a router, and now it's packet router, it needs to have many interfaces and so on. And most of this, especially for network policies, except for the address, the IP blocks part, it doesn't care which interface anything came in over. So it can be completely applied on any data going between two pods. It doesn't have to go over the cluster network. It can really be over any networks, and that could be expressed. So say that we should be able to work with network policies. We should be able to handle overloaded address spaces. But I think that model needs to be at least worked on at the same time, so we know what we're applying network policies to. And if the assumption is sort of, yeah, we're still just doing network policies for the primary interface, okay, great. But then sort of let's state that. And if some crazy people then wants to apply it to many interfaces, fine, they can go and do that. But sort of, where are we going with networking?
Yeah. I think it's a good
So, but,
idea. And rewinding back to where we should put a document like this for Prasad and Nadeem and anyone else working on this, I think it might be good to start a Google Doc, and we can work on, how we got here, why we need V2 there. And when it gets to a stable point, we can convert it to a README and put it in the repo. Does that make sense? Rather than trying to iterate on a PR as a group.
No, I think that's a good idea. I mean, it'll be easy for everybody to comment on the Google Doc.
So I do think that do not be shy. Right? The strength of the Kubernetes networking policies is the lack of IP addresses.
Yeah.
Like that means that they apply to, in reality, anything. It's about how objects talk to each other. And then for north-south inbound, okay, we need to have IP blocks. How should they be expressed and managed? But that to me is sort of the really secondary part that comes.
Yep.
They need to be handled
Okay.
better than they are now.
So got it. So Andrew, we are going to take one action item where we create a Google Doc and keep adding why we are trying to take a little different approach.
Yep. And if you could just add that link to the agenda, I have some other documents that I had put together internally that I can bring out and kind of go over why we need a V2, like why are we here? So some stuff that might help out there. And we can bring it up in the next meeting. And also a call to everyone, like, let's start reviewing these pull requests that Prasad and Nadeem have put out, kind of in tangent. I think it'll help us shape how we're going to move forward here.
Agree. Thanks. Thanks, Andrew. And by the way, thanks for helping out, like, how to raise these PRs. This is the first time we were doing.
No problem.
And, we were asking too many questions to you on private,
No problem. No problem. That's what I'm here for, to help out with people and foster the community. Cool. Great. Well, we're getting towards the end. Does anyone have anything else before we wrap up? Awesome. So I think we have some good action items for this week. It was a great meeting. Let's keep on moving forward. And I really appreciate everyone's time today. And please reach out on Slack if there's anything else you need to know.
Yeah, guys. Have a nice week.
Have a good week, everybody. Talk to you later.
Talk to you later. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.